A young sailor was on a train ride with his commanding officer. Also in that compartment where they were riding, there was a beautiful young lady and her grandmother riding there as well. And so the four of them were riding along and making small talk as they went. Suddenly the train entered into a short but completely dark tunnel. It was complete blackout for just a few moments. And as the train was traveling in that utter darkness, there was the unmistakable sound of a kiss and then a slap. And they came out the other side of the tunnel into the light. No one said anything, but all four of them just sat there with their own thoughts. The woman thought to herself, that was a really nice kiss, but I wish my grandmother hadn't slapped him like that. I hope he's okay. The commanding officer said, I really don't blame that young sailor for kissing that pretty girl, but I just wish when she'd gone to slap him that her aim was a little better and that she hadn't slapped me by accident. The grandmother thought to herself, well, I can't believe he was brazen enough to kiss her, but I'm proud of my granddaughter for slapping him for it. And the young sailor sat back with a smile and thought to himself, this is a good day. It's not every day you get to kiss a pretty girl and slap your commanding officer all at the same time. And sometimes we don't see what's around the corner next in life, do we? We're just never quite sure if what's coming next is kisses or slaps in life, are we? We wish we had full control over everything that comes our way in life. We wish somehow we could always get up in the morning and diagram, this is how my day will go. We wish as teenagers we could sit down and say, here's the life I dream, now it will happen. In fact, we wish that somehow by just working hard or just playing by the rules or just by getting up in the morning and breathing, somehow everything we desire in this life will come to us. But how many of you know life doesn't work that way, does it? And it brings us surprises. And sometimes we're uncertain of what is coming just next around the corner. And sometimes life brings to us tremendous difficulties. It brings pain. It brings hardship. It brings uncertainty and fear. And we really don't know what's next. And suddenly we get into a situation where we say, you know what? I don't like this situation. I don't want this situation, but I can't change this situation. It just is what it is. And in fact, what becomes even more troublesome is sometimes we get into situations and say, not only is this situation what it is, but I don't see any way that it's going to change. I don't know what to do when there's nothing that I can do. You're in a dead-end job. You have too many years in to think you'll go do something different. Your boss isn't near retirement. He's not going anywhere for a long time. You don't think you can make the money that you're making somewhere else, and you wouldn't know where to begin even if you thought you could, and you're just there, and you go to work, but you don't love your work. You have health issues. It's probably not going to kill you, but it's daily pain. It's exhausting. It's debilitating. You can only manage to do the things you need to do, but you can't even dream of doing the things you would love to do because you don't have the energy. You don't have the health. You don't have the wherewithal to do it. And you have prayed about it, and you've been to the doctor. You've had every test imaginable. There's no cure for what you're going through right now. And you are thinking to yourself, it just is what it is, and it isn't going to change. What do you do when there's nothing you can do? You had some dreams, but they've crashed. They're not coming true. You were sure you were going to get into that college, but you didn't get the acceptance letter. Or maybe some of you are watching your kids making decisions that are tearing your heart out, and you wish you could go and impose your will on them and impart your wisdom on them and undo the decisions that they've made, but you can't. And in fact, you're watching them dig themselves into a deeper and deeper and deeper hole, and some of them have gotten to a place now where there are now circumstances that can't change. They've locked themselves into something, and you don't know what to do because there's nothing you can do. Or you look around and you see someone else living the life you wish you had, that you thought you were supposed to have, that someone told you you deserved to have. It doesn't help you get those Christmas letters from people. And you went, really? They got to do that? I would love to do that. Really? She got another promotion? I haven't had a promotion in 3 years. Really? They're having another baby? Do you know how long I've asked God to help us just to have one? And you feel like you are simply in God's waiting room. Your spouse refuses to come to church. He's not going to divorce you. He isn't cheating on you. But he isn't going to love you the way you wish he would love you. And you just feel underloved. And your marriage and your home life is nothing but a dismal status quo. And you feel like you're just waiting. And you don't even know what you're waiting for. And what makes it even worse is you've run out of solutions. You can't think of anything else to do to try to change it. And the only things that you can come up with, will only make things worse. Some of us think, well, maybe I could solve my loneliness, and you chase a wrong relationship, and then you're going to have to deal with everything that rolls out from that. You're dealing with your sadness by self-medicating with food or alcohol, but that only brings on a whole new set of even more troublesome circumstances. So you're just stuck. What do you do when there's nothing you can do? It is what it is. And today, if you're a believer, you feel betrayed by God. You feel disappointed in God. God, why did you let this happen? Why did you cause this to happen? I don't even know which it is, God, but I thought that if I served you, Lord, is this how you do your kids? Is this how it's supposed to be? Some of you are sitting here today and you're saying, you know what, I'm intrigued by the things that go on here, but I'm not necessarily a believer in God. I'm not even sure he exists, and I don't know if this makes any sense, Pastor Todd, but if he does, I'm mad at him. Because I feel like he doesn't like me very much, and frankly, right now, the feelings are mutual. Because what I am going through, I don't know what to do. And we're going to take about 4 or 5 weeks to talk about what do you do when there's nothing you can do? What do you do when you're in the waiting room? And I want to begin this first week of this by saying you're not alone in feeling that way. And the Bible is full of stories of people who spent time in God's waiting room and had to figure out what in the world to do with their faith while they were there. One of those great examples is Moses. Moses understood how you feel. Can I tell you, Moses never saw his life unfolding the way it did. I don't know if you know his story or not, but the era in which Moses was born, there was great fear running through Egyptian leadership, so much so that they had said, we're afraid that the Hebrew slaves are going to not only outnumber us, but someday overpower us. And so the Pharaoh put out a very evil edict, which was when a child is born, and there were Egyptian midwives who would come and help with the birthing, when a child is born, if it's a male child, you throw it into the Nile and drown it. But Moses, when he was born, his mother was tricky and refused to let that happen. Eventually, when he was old enough to where they knew they wouldn't be able to keep quiet or the secret that he existed, she made a basket, covered it in this pitch, this black tar, put Moses, if you will, in a little boat and floated him down the Nile. Did you know that the word that they used there for basket, that they put Moses in, is only used one other time in the Bible? It's used for Noah's Ark. Think about the beginning, the promising beginning for Moses. He's going to be the one that redeems and rescues, just like God used Noah to rescue the whole earth. and to keep it from disappearing. Moses is going to be the deliverer that's going to keep the people of God from disappearing. That's called an auspicious beginning. And then he is found by Pharaoh's daughter and rescued. And then when he's rescued, Pharaoh's daughter says, you know what, I need someone to nurse this child and help raise this child. And the girl runs off, who's Moses' own sister, runs off and gets Moses' mother. And Moses' mother becomes fundamental in the beginning and the raising of Moses. And so from Moses' birth, in his early and formative years, he hears from his mother again and again and again, you're a special child. God's got a plan for your life. You will be the deliverer of God's people. And there is no doubt that Moses understood this and grew up at some point recognizing this was God's plan for his life. The reason we know that's true is because in the book of Acts, it says when Moses was 40 years old, he went out to see the plight of his people. At 40, Moses said, I'm ready. I'm ready for my life to become everything that God himself has said it is going to be. Everything he set me up to be and to do, I'm ready. And so he goes out to see the plight of his people. And when he does, he sees an Egyptian taskmaster who is mercilessly beating a Hebrew slave. And Moses jumps in. Now, can I tell you something? In the United States, within the laws of this country, if somebody is attacking somebody else at a level at which we believe they can be killed, you have the right to step in and to keep it from happening. You have the legal right to do so. And if you end up killing the person in defense of the other person, that's allowable by law. So I can't answer for you all that went down in this circumstance with Moses, but as far as we can tell, he may not even have broken a law. But what he did do is broke trust with his Egyptian leaders, and he had to run because word got out. And so you know what Moses did? He fled. Moses' efforts to rescue his people lasted one day. He flees to the only place not under Egyptian control in the Middle East at that time. Egypt is powerful. He flees to a place called Midian. Out into the desert country of Midian he goes. And that 40-year-old man goes into the desert until he sees a burning bush. And Stephen, in his sermon in the New Testament in the book of Acts, reveals something to us. That Moses was in the desert, are you ready for this? Not for 4 weeks, not for 4 years, but for 40 years. Moses is in God's waiting room. How difficult it must have been for Moses to settle into what must have felt to him like someone else's life. In fact, we're given some of the hint of the angst and the anguish that Moses goes through, because while he is out there in Midian, he marries, and his firstborn son he names Gershom, which means I am a foreigner in a foreign land. Can I tell you, you must really be experiencing something in life when you start naming your kids for it. Moses names his first child, God, have you forgotten I'm out here? I am a foreigner in a foreign land. And so as if to drive this point home just a little further, it says in verse 1 of the text that we read, chapter 3, that Moses, he led the flock far into the wilderness. Now, I looked at the way that's rendered or translated in some of the other translations. One says the far side of the wilderness. One says the backside of the desert. Now, that sounds appealing, doesn't it? One version reads it as beyond the wilderness. Can you imagine? Folks, it's like the writer said, so there's Moses. He's in the wilderness. It's not far enough out in the middle of nowhere yet, so God has him take the flock to oblivion. I mean, that's where this story begins. And Moses is saying to himself, God, really? Is this how this is supposed to go down? Now, if words don't get it for some of us, pictures sometimes do. So I want to show you something this morning. It says that Moses took the flock, and they're there at the Mount of Horeb. I have a picture of what Mount Horeb looks like. That's Moses' daily home, folks, with a lot of stinking sheep. Now let me show you an artistic rendering by historians of what the palaces looked like where Moses grew up. Let's go back to the first picture, Joe. This is Moses' reality. Second picture, this is what Moses thought his life was supposed to be. You catch the difference? One wakes up with dust in your eyes and your trousers. The other wakes up to the rivers of Egypt on soft pillows and the fruit and vegetables, all that you could ever long for. And if Moses ever looked to God and said anything during 40 years, at some point he looked at God and said this one word, really? Really? This is my life now? This is what you have for me? And no doubt at some point, Moses is tempted to believe the two lies that I want to unmask in the remainder of this morning's sermon. The two lies that the devil will throw at you when you end up in God's waiting room. And they are these. God isn't there. And God doesn't care. When your life is upside down, if it's upside down long enough, if it's upside down tilted hard enough, if it's upside down and discouraging enough, at some point the enemy is going to whisper and throw at you, God isn't really there, or God doesn't care. Wait long enough and you'll start to doubt things that you believed. Moses longs to hold on to his identity as a descendant of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and a follower of their God. But now, 40 years in the desert will cause anyone to question. And so God gives him the answer. Look at it. God said to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel. Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my, what's the next word? Eternal name, my name to remember for all generations. I want you to hear this morning. Don't miss this. It doesn't matter whether or not you feel like God is there. It doesn't matter whether or not today you can prove that God is there. It doesn't matter whether or not it feels like God has taken a single step in the direction that you have been praying for the last 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years. It does not change the fact God eternally always has been and always will be. He is. He is there. And you need to know that your problems do not mean that God lacks power. Your troubles do not mean that God has somehow fallen asleep or died somewhere in the meanwhile. Your God has not ceased to exist. He hasn't disappeared. And now listen to me. Your bad days are not proof that God isn't there, any more than your good days are proof that he is. Understand that if we only trust in God circumstantially enough so that we say, when things are good, I believe he's there, and when things are bad, I believe he's not, there wouldn't be very many Christians on Monday mornings. Now would there? Thank you for getting that. I appreciate that. There'd be lots of great Christians on Friday night and not many on Monday mornings, because here's the reality, folks. The existence of our God is not pinned to our personal experience or to our emotions. Look around you and see woven into the fabric of creation all around you the reality of the existence of our God who exists. Look inside to that which is woven deep inside of you and your own psyche and your own personality and discover there is a longing inside of you for more to this life than we can find in and of ourselves, that we were made for relationship with God. He is there. He still exists. And I'll tell you something. There are moments when we wait and we wait and we wait that we fear we might lose our hope, but worse yet, that we might lose our faith. But Hebrews chapter 6 says to us, the foundational statement of faith is to believe that God exists. That's where it begins. And then he says, and he'll reward those who seek him. And that's where it begins. You've got to unmask the lie that God doesn't exist because things are simply bad. What you've got to do is you've got to start to say, I don't see God right now. I may not feel God right now in the midst of my difficulty, but I'm going to declare with eyes of faith that he existed. In other words, stop saying it is what it is and start saying God is who he is. Moses had to stop saying, God, don't you know it's been 40 years in the desert? And had to start saying, you know what? You are who you are. And God said, I will always be who I have always been. You see, this morning we can get into deep theological water about whether when hard things happened in our life, God caused it or God allowed it. And I have heard a lot of theological arguments about that stuff, but I got to tell you, as far as it comes down to personal experience, that's just semantics because it's no different. In our experience, it's no different. Pastor Todd, I'm sick right now. Did God cause it or did God allow it? Pastor Todd, I lost my job. Did God cause it or did God allow it? Pastor Todd, my children are struggling. Did God cause it or did God allow it? I don't know. We can play this game all day long, but I'll tell you this. Life is too complex to define every problem we have as, well, that's 60% my fault and 40% God's allowance. That's 80% what my daddy did and 20% what I did. Life's too complex. I can't sit here and define all that stuff out for you today. And what I'm saying to you is, in the end, isn't that just ultimately a game of semantics? Whether God causes or God allows, because ultimately you're experiencing it either way, aren't you? So the question is simply this. Am I going to continue to believe that God is who he says he is? And to do so, we will say he is the sovereign God of the universe, and so I submit myself to him. There is release in submission. Let me repeat that, because this is where we got to get to this morning. There is release in submission, in coming to the place where we say, I'm not in charge of the whole universe. And if I was, it probably couldn't do a better job than God does. Just don't think I could. So God, I submit myself to your will. I'm going to put my trust in this unseen God. And so you say, how in the world do I submit? How do I submit? We submit in a way that honors God by combating the second lie, the one that says God doesn't care. God does care, even if he's not doing what you think would be the caring thing. God does care, even if you're not seeing him work in a way you want him to work right now. Look what God said to Moses. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Israel. That's news to Moses. That's news to Moses. Moses said, God, I gave one day trying to rescue them, and now you've sent me out here for 40 years. Are you just missing something? Are you just not seeing it? I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am, what's the word? Concerned about their suffering. You know, the first lie the devil says, God isn't there, that impugns his immutable qualities. The unchanging reality that he has always existed. That's what that lie comes up against. But this second lie, that he doesn't care, impugns his eternal character. It goes against the reality that our God is love. How many of you believe God is love today? Well, he's still love even if you are in a lousy circumstance right now. He is still love, and he still cares. And you're going to have to trust that he loves you, even though you don't understand. Because this morning in God's waiting room, here's your message for week 1. What God wants you to do that you might hold and grow in your faith, even in the waiting room, is you must submit and you must trust. You must do both. Like, well, if I submit, doesn't that mean I automatically trust? I mean, I can't submit to God as God of the universe unless I trust him, can I? Oh, yeah, you can submit without trusting. You do it. We do it all the time, folks. We submit without trusting. Have you ever paid your taxes? That is submission without trust. Track with me. I got to pay them. It's what I have to do. I submit as a citizen of the United States, so I pay my taxes, but there's probably not one of us in this room who will raise our hand and say, I trust every way that our government spends my money. All right, I thought I'd get an amen somewhere in the room, right? There's not one of us. No matter how happy you were with whoever was in there, you would never believe that our government is trustworthy with every dollar we give. But we still submit, don't we? Some of you have a boss or a boss's 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 boss who makes decisions that trickle down and influence you. And you submit to them as an employee of that organization. You might submit for a variety of reasons. You might submit because big term you believe in what that company's doing. You might submit because you believe paychecks are good things to get at the end of the week. But you submit. But you may not trust that man, that woman is as wise as they need to be, or that they are really looking out for you, or they're even looking out for the best interest, but you still submit. It is possible to submit without trusting, but what I'm telling you is God calls us to submit to him and trust him in the middle of pain, to do both. And the only way I know to be able to do that is to believe that the God who sees the big picture sees what we can't see. And listen, he may not ever give you explanation for why things are the way you are. You may never get that. It may take till glory for God to iron out all those wrinkles in your understanding. But at some point you trust him enough to say, you know what, God, you are all wise and I trust you. We were riding home. We were at our general conference. That's why we were not here last weekend. And we were at the general conference for the Wesleyan Church, and I'll be sharing some things with you as we go along, some of the direction that our denomination is going, and I'm very pleased and very proud to be a part of it, and you will be as well. But as we were riding home, we were coming home from Western New York, back down here to this area. Now, I've lived in this area for almost 20 years, if you count the time over in Delaware, and so I know the route from Western New York, or from the southern tier of New York, home without having to run nav. But do you ever just run your nav just to run your nav? You just kind of run it, right? So I'm running the navigation software, and we're coming through Harrisburg, and all of a sudden it says, in 2 miles, take exit so-and-so. And I said, I've never taken that exit. I know how to get home. I know how to get around Harrisburg, and it is not by getting off at that exit. And so I handed the phone to my wife and said, honey, figure out what's going on. My wife is a lot of things. Navigator is not one of them. And so she's like, I'm like, no, flip it over that, and so she's looking at, I'm like, push that button that says alternate route. What's going on? Because I'm usually would go straight here and then around the 283 or whatever that is. I said, I'm not supposed to be getting off. And she's looking. So finally she looked and she said, well, there's the road you usually go. And I said, well, tap it. And she tapped it. And you know what it said next to it? This route 30 minutes longer. And the reality was there was a bad accident and traffic was stopped on my normal route, and it was giving us an alternate route. And it ended up taking us on this alternate route that ran us right along the water. It was really it may become my primary route in the future. It was such a pretty drive, around 10, 15 miles all along the river there. And now, first of all, let me stop and say, no illustration when it relates to God is a perfect illustration. Because can I just get a witness today that Google Maps is not perfect? Can I get a witness to that today? Amen to that, right? Google Maps is not perfect. Neither is whatever nav system that you're using. It's not perfect. So it's not a perfect illustration. But let me use it at least for this much. Somehow that program there did understand and see some things that I couldn't see driving my car. Now think about our God, who is perfect, who never makes a mistake, who sees around corners and around bends and beyond time. Our God knows what he's doing, even if it makes no sense to us at the time. That's called trust. Not just, oh, well, I'm going to submit to you, God, and say you are who you are, which is Lord of the universe. But on top of that, I'm going to trust you that you know what you are doing and that you care for me, even if I can't see it, and frankly, God, even if it doesn't feel like it today. So what do you do when there's nothing you can do? You submit and you trust. And there's a lot more to talk about on this topic. Fortunately, we're going to give it some more weeks. I want to talk to you next week about how God actually uses these times in our lives. But before we go out the door today, there's something we need to do. I believe we need to go back and undo those lies and speak truth. And so here's what I want us to do. Instead of believing the lie of the enemy that God isn't there, we need to say this today. We need to hear ourselves say these words, God is there. Come on, say it with me. God is there. Turn to someone next to you and say it. God is there. Close your eyes and just whisper it with me. God is there. All right, open your eyes back up because let's unmask that second lie. The second lie was that God doesn't care. And here's what we need to hear ourselves say today. God does care. Say it with me. God does care. Say it louder. God does care. Close your eyes. Let's whisper it as a truth deep into our hearts. God does care. Let's bow our heads together as we close out this morning.